Turns out he's a major cinephile.
They don't watch enough movies. It's a very simple formula.
And here we go. Well, hello, loyal listener. It's me, Nick, from this very podcast you are currently listening to, Nick Nat Goes to the Movies. This is, of course, I know it's late, but my first episode of 2024. It's been more than a bit of an absence, but we're somehow back into NFL and work hard for me season. Hopefully this podcast, and I know I'm not apologizing anymore, just we get them when we get them and try to do better. Always the goal, like for eating better, working out, always try to do better. But the hope is to have more regular episodes and then just become the biggest podcaster there ever is, right? Hit the internet stratosphere before the hopeful Packers and Bills Super Bowl. That would be just peachy for me. But as this is not a sport podcast, we should, I wager, make it back, bring it back to movie content. I ended 2023 with a spooky seasonal slasher. I don't even know if I remember what it was. It feels like it was so long ago. And while there are only so many of those, the number of general spooky movies out there, it seems to be endless. And in the spirit of being back into spooky season, all fall, pumpkin spice, and all that you could want, and I always just in general want to feel something, normally just fear to supersede any other feelings just kind of floating around in my mind. I wrote this a while ago, and I think I saw these all in that trying to feel something, and I thought to myself, that'd be a great episode. Watched them again. And here we find ourselves in a franchise that would have been a surprise to me, college me thinking, wow, I can't believe I can make it through any of those. Sure, I've seen other things I could talk about, one-offs like Night Swim, or the latest Conjuring franchise entry, The Nun 2, The Renunning, when, the nun says it's nunning time. Now, I did watch those all, of course, but I figured it's been so long, I really wanted to dive deep into something before maybe I get to more one-off quick hit episodes. And it was just great to dive into another series for one of these elongated episodes. And in this case, I'm talking about Insidious. 5 movies that the first one came out in 2011, with the most recent coming out last year, I think, either 1 year or 2 years ago. Insidious is the other Patrick Wilson spooky series, and like The Conjuring before, I was led to believe this was like the scariest thing ever. But young Nick thought Pirates of the Caribbean and The Walking Dead were the scariest things out there at one point. So clearly, I have grown to crave this feeling of fear and not feel other feelings. And this was the latest attempt to find my limit, to see what will truly scare me. Now, of course, with Smile 2 coming out, I mean, that one's pretty much the limit. Smile 1 up there with things I would watch that is scary enough. And also, with Patrick Wilson, just a couple days ago, tried this and watched, I love a good Western, but Bone Tomahawk, like the horror Western, maybe thriller Western, I don't know what you want to call it, but Kurt Russell, very good in that. I mean, he's great in Westerns. He just always seems to be on edge and just perfect for that time period and just on point. But like, Patrick Wilson kind of came out of nowhere pretty good. Gory movie, for sure, in spurts. Good atmosphere, though. I don't need to watch Bone Tomahawk again, but I'm happy I did. But to this topic and this episode of the Insidious series, it's not fully about, I don't want to just talk about how scary things are in Insidious. It's also about how these movies stack up individually and as a series. In short, are they good? The age-old question for these things and podcasts and movie reviewers alike. Do you going to watch them? Or do you want to watch them? Should you watch them? Especially for something that's a series of movies or multiple seasons of a show. There's an investment in there, and you want to know, is the investment worth it? This one episode is tricky with the spread out nature of, finding these on streaming services, and I'm going to go on a limb and assume where I thought these were when I wrote this episode, that they're still there. And if not, that'll be shame on me, and I'll have to put it in the comments on social media about where you can see them nowadays, right? And I'll try to keep this as isolated as possible for these 5 movies. It goes without saying there'll be some comparisons to the Conjuring series, and not just because of a certain actor who takes center stage in both of these franchises. So yes, Patrick Wilson as Josh Lambert, who was great in the first Aquaman and was unfortunately a part of a super strange sequel and end cap of the DCEU. He is both a leading man in Insidious and The Conjuring. In the latter, he was one member of a married couple fighting demons and such. Here in Insidious, he's a dad. Sometimes the character is portrayed as a kid who's just dealing with all these gosh darn spirits, or entities as this franchise calls them. So he doesn't have any history or tools to fix everything necessarily like his character does in The Conjuring, where he kind of is a tag team of 2 powerhouse fighting the fight. While he is outstanding in this and so many other movies, especially in this genre, you have to go with Lin Shaye as the main staple of the whole series. Maybe it's because I spent so much time with her character, Elise Rayner. If you chronologically watch these movies, you have 2 whole movies with her before ever really meeting the Lambert family. I've not seen her in anything else. Something that will be evident for a lot of these franchise actors, but man, does she bring so much here. I can't believe how people would have watched these movies starting with Insidious and how they used her character after that movie with the passage of time and going back to see her. I can only speak to the roles I've seen people in. Rose Byrne, of course, one of the actors who had a bigger role as any in the X-Men reboot, which, hey, all those X-Men things are looking pretty cool now after what I would consider very, very good Deadpool Wolverine, which I promise you an episode on that too. Big list of things to catch up on. She also has a good active role in the 28 Days sequel, 28 Weeks Later, which obviously I think 28 Days is the one that most people think about as the good, strong one. But 28 Weeks Later, don't sleep on that. There's some pretty good stuff with... she has some good stuff. I really like Jeremy Renner in that one too. And eventually, I think they're doing years, not months later. It was the announced next sequel, so they skipped something there. But I think it's 28 years later. Not sure what that could be. But love a good zombie thing, so I'm always in. And I remember seeing that the big difference between Conjuring and Insidious is if you prefer Byrne or Vera Farmiga, which I think is crazy because, once again, I think Lin Shaye is probably the staple of the series, but I did see that and thought, okay, interesting. And with that in mind, I just never felt like they did as much with Rose Byrne as I wanted her to do. It never felt like she had a huge active role. As these movies go, they all become a bit of a family drama, especially once you get past the first 2 chronologically. And the standard is always just hey, someone in the family is seeing or hearing things. And Renee Lambert, who's, her character, it's important for the story structure. I just wish she did more for the plot or had more to do. Even less was done by the non-special supernatural gift brother actor, Andrew Astor, who played Forrest Lambert. Now the other brother, Dalton Lambert, is played by Ty Simpkins. And I actually, weirdly enough, know a couple things that this character, or this guy, I actually know a couple things that this guy's been in. Obviously, Iron Man 3. Wish he had more MCU time with him, just to see where it would go. He's the younger brother in Jurassic World. Not as good. And now that series has kind of gone off the rails a little bit with the last one. And we'll see if this new one's any better, but, I just like dinosaur movies, and seemingly they're the only people who can do them. And I think this series, Insidious, is where this actor has had kind of a prominent role, where especially later on the franchise shifts pretty heavy-handedly to a father-son story, and that's sort of all you're really going to meet and care about. The unexpected comic relief in this movie also started early on and sort of dropped off as the series went chronologically, was these two characters, Tucker and Specs, played by Angus Sampson and Lee Wannell. And I did not expect like a couple goofballs in the franchise to kind of be there throughout. I don't think there was anything like this for intentional humor outside of maybe some dark humor moments like in The Conjuring. Nothing close to that. But for your first of the fun cinematic facts about this episode, how about Wannell being in The Matrix Reloaded? Was he the main guy? No, that was Keanu Reeves. He was not him. But definitely a memorable death. Spoiler alert, not needed for a 2003 movie, I hope, for a probably random enough death scene. But he was one of the engineer guys on the ship who died when the ship blew up outside of the Matrix around the end of it. That was like the very Final Destination style death scene where like metal was rattling around, you knew something was coming, and then like everyone on the ship died, and that's how it happened. Super Final Destination. Just to round out the other three people I want to mention, not as many of these were default staples in all 5 entries. In fact, none of them were. Was Dermot Mulroy the biggest role of Insidious 3 as Dad Sean Brenner? No. But I did like him a lot in Scream 6, which I watched on the plane back from Brazil, among a couple other Scream things, just to keep something going on. And man, am I nervous for that franchise and its future. Apparently, Neve Campbell's coming back, but I don't. Who knows what else is happening? But I do love those movies. I really do. And at least there's a shot. I know What You Did Last Summer is coming back with both those staple actors, Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. Sad that they killed off Sarah Michelle Gellar in the first one, because it would have been cool to see another thing of the two of them together. I know we're not getting a Scooby-Doo 3 anytime soon, so I don't know what we're going to get that has them together. Now, the first time this happened, I saw Barbara Hershey as the mom, Lorraine Lambert. I swore I'd seen her in, I feel like I've seen her in everything. I must really know who this is. But did I remember her as the Queen of Hearts in the Once Upon a Time series? Maybe, but I sure doubt it. What a fun franchise Once Upon a Time was. It had so many big name actors randomly in there. Like Sebastian Stan is in there for a couple episodes, or the guy who's the lead in 50 Shades of Grey, Jamie Dornan. That's who it is, Jamie Dornan. What a strange franchise. I did I did for the first time watch the Descendants movies to kind of be like, oh, is this kind of like Once Upon a Time? No, not really, no. But I gave it a go because I was seeing all over my TikTok feed that little secret recipe, that whole thing was all over my TikTok. At that point, it's like, I guess I gotta see all 4 of these on Disney Plus, and I sure did, and they were fine. And lastly, for this franchise, possibly one of the most known actors in the whole series, for me, and for probably the horror world, I would say, is Steve Coulter. Patrick Wilson's not the only connective piece between Insidious and The Conjuring. He was in both those too. He was kind of the priest sending off the Warren couple to all their missions in the Conjuring franchise. He was one of the main leaders of Alexandria in the midpoint of Walking Dead, and obviously he's in Insidious, so he's a psychic medium, non-exorcist, but he at least is like an academic of the demon world. So the parallels with both him and Wilson are fascinating with their roles in Conjuring and Insidious. Well, I think Conjuring is more popular overall. There's more entries, of course. I think there's probably people think about it more, probably because of The Nun. I don't know what else people would be like, oh, yeah. I mean, obviously the couple, Ed and Lorraine, and Nicole, loosely based on real things. That's neat, obviously, too. But Insidious actually came out first, and not like barely. But 2013 was a big year for both series, and of course Patrick Wilson, and to a smaller degree Steve Coulter. Now, as a watch of these movies goes, like Conjuring, I want to do this episode in the way that I watched them, in chronological order. It was for sure not how they were released. Super weird. I don't know, a more confusing chronological franchise. Conjuring does this a little bit, but Insidious, I felt like I was jumping around. So the release order is not how we're doing it. Instead, it's the third movie, the fourth movie, the first, the second, and then the fifth. I don't know if that's the best way to watch these, but if someone is making a movie series or a TV series and going backwards and forward, they have to know that it has to make sense to watch them in the order that they come out. And if they don't, that's on someone for really screwing up continuity. And that's not my fault. That's how I'm going to watch them, and that's how I'm always going to do it. So, I might have lost some cool foreshadowing moments, as just things are linear now in timeline. But even so, this franchise has flashbacks even further from events we see. So I'm just going to do the best I can and start this episode with Insidious 3, which is all about the glory of the series' true MVP and lead, Elise Rayner. With the convoluted structure for numbers and how these should go to watch, I'll try not to hold that against them this much, because you never know. You try to make a movie, you say, oh, that turned out well, you make another one, and then you, like an actor, you want to make a couple go backwards, and then you want to finish it up somehow, and I don't think the new one is even going to relate to any of these characters, I'm pretty sure. These movies are all fiction with no reality to base their stories off of, so you can kind of make up whatever you want, and in reality, they probably don't have like a huge movie plan. I don't think they went into this saying, hey, let's make a 5-movie arc and bounce it around like crazy. If you start these chronologically like I did with Conjuring, you're going to be thrown into a world without a ton of build-up or expectations, or kind of a tone for how this franchise works. The first chronological nun movie in the Conjuring series, we'll see you meeting some old nuns, and spooky stuff happens to you nowhere near meeting the Warren power couple. The first Insidious movie starts the same way most do. Meeting a family, moving into a spooky house and such. Here to kick the series off in timeline order, we meet Elise contacting a spirit, or trying to at least. Immediately you can tell she is an acting force in such a brief time with her, which is so much fun. Also, remember that these movies always have like the same issues of what not to do and why. Oh, well, that's where you went wrong, you idiot. Don't go calling out to the dead. Don't go playing with Ouija boards. Don't go doing the stupid tarot thing, like that horrible movie, which I did watch. And even think about it, like Conjuring 2 happened because of a Ouija board. And like that one movie, what was it? Touch or hold or grab. Don't grab spooky hands and let dead people inside for a little bit. I don't even remember what that was called. It was an E24 one, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. Ends a mind trip, that's for sure. I don't know how much this movie does overall to make you care about the lead, Quinn, played by Stephanie Scott. Not the most interesting character in the world. I'm sure everything, you'd relate to characters as you are, so I'm not a teenage girl. In the same way that, if you were a single parent, you could relate to being frazzled and trying to run a house, as her dad, Dermot Mulroney, kind of does. The more I care about her story, the thing I care most about is probably based on her family ties to her deceased mom. I don't know how many jump scares this franchise starts you with in release date order, but man, they kind of get you with a sudden hit when literally hit like our non-Elise lead, like on a whim, just gets drilled by a car. Shocking. Now, she did run across the big city NYC traffic earlier, and that's a big no-no. City slicker driving is not pedestrian friendly all the time. I learned that early on moving to LA for a spell. So, it's kind of the Chekhov's big getting hit by a car thing. Fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, and okay, I guess I probably am getting hit by a car now. In a movie franchise that has a really interesting take on the world of the spirits and demons and all that, it's wild they also throw in a Lady Doomsayer in there for extra measure. I don't think they needed to have a crazy Ralph here on top of the supernatural stuff. Maybe some subtlety in this would have helped, but it's a bit much what they do here. While Quinn may not be the most interesting story here, heck, sometimes she is downright annoying. They do have some good scare moments, like with the knocking. She's knocking on the wall with someone that lives next door in the apartment, and they're kind of have an unusual answer back, and then she finds out that that person's not actually home, or being touched by someone spooky above her. Like, in a weird way, this movie actually gives more proof to spooky happenings with clear breaks on wall damage and wet footprints, stuff that in most of these movies you would wager as irrefutable proof to get the heck out of there. The same things they try to explain away poorly in the second Conjuring movie. I did rewatch the first two of those before watching this franchise. Just like I said, they are similar. You're gonna find some similarities and feel they're not in the same connected universe or anything like that, but if you want the same tone and vibe, I'm sure you could bounce between all these and feel good about everything. As the first of these, though, and they have to make sense watching in this order, you never get over the fact that Elise is a certified badass with how she manages to handle and deal with all the demons in her life. She's clearly an old lady who just has a sense of being in control of things that you would think no way she can. And it's no old Laurie Strode who had a shooting range and was a doomsday prep lady who that's a little different, right? She was trying to be the Terminator. She was trying to out-Terminator the Terminator of her franchise. At least not really the same thing. And it's funny, you go into these thinking, oh, there's not that many jump scares, but this entry especially loaded with jump scares for the franchise. I would say the villain here is nothing special. The scares are good, right? Good to have some scares and jump scares. I don't mind a good jump scare. I kind of like the elation of, oh, got me good. But the demon in this one, just very blah. I don't really know what the heck these spirit types are going for haunting this girl, what the whole goal is. But this girl, man, she goes through the ringer. She ends up in a whole full body cast eventually. And like I said, this in a weird way is the most supportive and holy cow, there's true proof of something going on. You gotta believe that this dad is just aware of in this horror world where most parents are that's nothing, it's the wind. He gets holy cow, something is going on. Pretty quick, he's right there working to save her from supernatural stuff with Elise. Love a supportive parent, not a brat era at all. But you know what? Very mindful, very demure. I know all the cool hippie lingo. The visuals for the Further, this version of I don't know if it's supposed to be a purgatory afterlife, maybe Stranger Things, the Upside Down. Also, very cool how they do this to play with darkness, light colors, and the scares are so prevalent whenever they end up in the Further, in the darkness of this franchise. This movie plays with them so well of just like a unique spirit world and a cool way like we see it exist. And while it's not always darkness, the spirit people always like so haunting how they're made up. Like there's like guys just like the smiling ones are the worst. It kind of reminds you of Smile, which can't believe they're making a sequel, but I'll be there to watch in theaters. And more, man, oh man, will that be a scary thing? Like it's like I said, that movie is like the limit for the genre, and we'll see how if the other one's scary or not. But man, Smile got me good. It's also worth noting you get to see that Elise has been fighting an entity in this movie, for a while now. Here is where things get a bit off because you're missing some context to why she's being haunted. As we find out later on the franchise, she helped a young Josh Lambert, Patrick Wilson's character, and the demon has been after her ever since. So she does have to fight that demon a bit throughout here, causing a real issue to what she is working on and like her ex-profession. But she got thrown back into it to help out a friend. So like we knew that there was like I don't want to do this, but stories and call to action, classic story structure. Now, I've never been a fan of the ghost show people who run around maybe spooky places. I know I have a friend and his wife who definitely watch those shows. It's fine. I'll do it with them, but I'm not picking it out myself. I'm a video person, so those things, like I know you can do edits, like it makes me a little doubtful, but I would never go to one of those places. The religious upbringing in me makes me wary of truly haunted stuff. But it's funny when this movie introduces their own pair of these guys, and they do eventually become staples of the series as much as Elise or the Lambert family, specifically like Patrick Wilson. Probably one of the better scenes, because this movie takes time to grow on you, is like possessed Quinn taking down all of the ghost hunters, going like wrench happy, like something you'd think in The Shining, and the spirit still almost makes her take her own life, all before Elise shows up. Brat era. She is Brat, to show the day. And like we kind of see her have a little bit of call to action. Steve Coulter kind of pushes her into it, which probably is where a little bit of guilt lies later on in the franchise. But, he's another demonologist, Carl, and the assumption is always she's better than he is. Which she is, because she's so Brat. The first of these Insidious movies is somewhat of a family story. This is just a abridged family story you only explore with first single movie. But man, do I relate to this dad so much here. He's doing all he can to keep this family functioning, and by the end of things, like, safe. It's not his story. You're supposed to say it's Quinn's, but man, does he help a ton. But really, it is Elisa's story. Even when they take her out from time to time, once she is there to the end, she girl bosses her way to command this would-be platoon of guys to help her fight some demon ass. Even if the demon here is so goofy and just wants to be a dick for the sake of being a dick. That's what I got out of it, at least. And speaking of dick spirits, man, is it great to see Elise fight off the woman in black, especially literally saying, not today, to literal death. It feels great to see a little bit of that power. And I do wonder what it would have been like seeing this, knowing how the first movie ends, if you watched it in release date order. It must have been uplifting. I mean, it stinks knowing this demon kills her eventually, but she has a fight back moment in the past, and obviously some things later on too. Here, it's just a precursor to her having a small victory, but it makes the death so much sadder 2 movies later. I know we're spoiling it, but whatever. And it's not just like possessed by someone who has leveled the playing field, as they both now are technically like live, but look, this girl boss is strong. She's girl bossing like a champ, and great retort, obviously, come on bitch, which can't do it as good as that. I mean, Alien obviously has their thing, but I'll take my Elise come on bitch any day. She does the same stuff to the demon who can't breathe. Like, she's so good fighting all these demons and just being like, in contrast, such a genuinely nice and caring maternal figure. She is the girl boss, final girl that we all should strive to be. And it never feels forced or anything. She just happens to be strong and powerful and also just a caring person. And those are two great, admirable qualities to have. And it's all acted to perfection by Lynn Shane, who brings all these pieces together. Speaking of mothers, love you, Mom. But to this point of this episode, not just saying the concept of moms, this movie really comes into its own in the last 30 minutes or so. But seeing Quinn, who, like I said, I'm iffy on as a main character, that, when she finally gets that love from her mother and she has that moment of closure with her, that act of love, man, I've seen it a couple times and it got me both. Not as hard as it did the first time, but, you get the goosebumps and the shudder feels on your back, the tear ups. Damn, that movie. It's no Coco cry where it gets me every time, but it's such a good moment of family love from the afterlife that we all need. The first time I did this, I had to call my mom, and my parents in general, and it's just oh, I gotta call you, I'm emotional, and who would have thought it? I still tell people about this, and it blows their mind that a random movie like Insidious 3 could get me to have emotional catharsis. It may not be the best movie. It's not the best movie. It's probably not even the best in the series, but the times that it kind of leans into being good, it really is because it leans into the family and motherhood angle, and that will get me every time. It feels so good coming from Elise as a mothering figure, and we never see this other family again, but it's still just the message rings true, and what an end. And it's not even just with that, that movie is what spurns the relationship that we see developed later on in Insidious and the movie in between these two. These ghost hunters, she becomes their maternal figure, their mother by proxy, and eventual partner in this ghost hunting kind of busting industry, dare I say. So many good vibes in this movie at the end. But as all scary movies do, the true end has to make us feel a bit uneasy, with one final jump scare relating to the first movie. Boo to that. It's a complex movie with ups and downs, but if you can make it to the end, spirit contacting scene, you'll find some great moments from the series' true lead, and maybe shed some unexpected tears along the way. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know. But did you do the same? I'd be shocked if you did. But if you are out there and the same happened to you, please let me know on socials if you did at any of the usual places, right? Knickknack IC, Knickknack Movies _IC, Twitter, Instagram, I'm on the usual ones. So that was Insidious 3, which is the first one. But now we're going to go to a non-numbered episode. But now we're going to go to a non-numbered entry in the film series. But it is the second one, Insidious: The Last Key. With how the first one that was released ends, they had to go to the past if they wanted to keep using Elise in these movies, which had to be a wild discovery that they killed off the best asset so quickly, immediately into the franchise. And to go into this world to make more entries, they had to go back in time to keep her coming back. While overall, this movie is second chronologically, the first things to happen in the series happen here with a young Elise and seeing her gift/curse of being able to see the other side, the further. And it sucks to see her affination for the spirit world be the cause of abuse from her dad. Her mom seems to be understanding of it all. I'm thinking it's on that side of the family. But at times, the old trope of that abusive, hard-nosed old dad from back in the day just feels like it's so been there, done that. Also, points from earlier in the episode. It's been a while since ideating this topic for this episode. And, watching these, for the first time, I did a second rewatch and everything. A few scenes stood out to me. Some sad, some scary. But I forgot, and now I, remember thinking back to, this franchise ditches the subtle scares from things that Mike Flanagan does in his haunted house shows. Like, subtle, the scares are there the whole time, and you kind of see them, and you freak yourself out thinking, is there something there or not? Instead, this franchise is actively littered with jump scares. Not sure what I was thinking, but talking and rewatching these, now I know, jump scares are a big part of all this. Unlike deaths in this franchise, for as scary as these can be, there's not, it's just not something this franchise is known for. Now, the crazy thing about this franchise, not counting, demon characters, no one really dies in the franchise, especially on camera. Elise's parents die early on. We see how her mom died based on a possession thing, and her abusive, demon-possessed dad dies eventually. And that's a big chunk of the deaths already for the whole 5-movie series. It does suck seeing Elise as a kid get possessed and be blamed and feel blamed for the death of her mom. The one parent that kind of had some rapport with and they cared for her. They do have a thing with motherhood in this franchise. Even if we have, a random one-off character and family to follow last time, this time, at least there's a sprinkling in with the old family life of Elise and kind of going back to her upbringing and stuff. Also worth noting that I think the villain was not super scary looking in the first one. No matter what you can say about this movie, and the level of quality, the villain spirit entity is at least scarier looking. Breathing mask old guy is one thing, but key hand guy for sure was scary, especially seeing what he can do. Also noting Warren, super cute dog that of course is named for the famous real world paranormal superpower couple and Lorraine Warren, which of course shares an actor in this movie. There's a couple, but we'll focus on Patrick Wilson. Steve Coulter, too. I love the movie character Elise, and I love more movies with her. But like Conjuring sometimes, these movie entries will always feel a bit superfluous without a continual threaded story. Elise replacing the Warrens in her franchise as, at times, going place to place until we meet the Lambert family. While these haunts are not always super interesting, the cute pairing of showing, the partner she has in the ghost hunting group of spectral sightings, knowing they're just as important as she is at times for the series, fun to see more of their rapport. This movie, you hit the good spots, and sometimes things get a little blah, but you hit the good spots here and there. While the actors I see a lot from Walking Dead, depending on how short they are in the show, most of the time I can pick them out from a crowd easy. So the dad here, Kirk Acevendo, was in 2 episodes in the second Governor arc. But I always think that, I just always think of the same things of, hey, Walking Dead, there he is, I found him, for Mitch, I believe it was. One of the 2 brothers who did not make it particularly far. Nothing gets past me as one of my first forays into spookier things. I don't know if... I'm pretty sure that came before Scream. That probably was the first foray into spooky things, not counting my unintended Saw viewing from college. It's fine. I think I'm over it. Not really, but kind of. But hey, look at me doing Insidious and stuff for fun. Oh, how times have changed. I don't know as I think which franchise is the scarier one right now, or maybe ever, between this and Conjuring. Even knowing time, relativity, and people can't die now, I did not know that before. And it is scary sending Boss Lady, albeit an older woman nonetheless, to go explore a haunted house with like no help. Hate that. There is no, big bad quite as bad as the Nun for me in either franchise, but the overall scares are here with the spirits, and I think just the overall afterlife is spookier. I don't know if I needed to see the childhood of Elise. I mean, I'm sure it's good. It sucks to see what sort of shaped her and gave her that strength, but if nothing else, seeing her stand up to her dad is great to see. The estranged brother storyline for abandoning him, though, I don't know. I don't like that. It makes her seem less good. I like her kicking astral plane ass and that kind of being it, and she's perfect and nothing's bad ever. This movie does take some wild turns of me forgetting what kind of movie we're watching, but when it becomes a very like human guy with a gun that one of the ghost boys kills, it takes us a moment to come back to like a haunted movie setting, as well as like the family angle that we're used to for what this franchise brings. The same thing happens with the Conjuring movies, but most of the movies in this franchise relate to either Elise or the Lambert family. Conjuring, I guess, is like 50-50 Warren family to the other less good movies like Nun and La Llorona. It's nice to see that the grand message is always Elise helps a random family last movie to get back into things, and now she's come back to help her family after she left her brother so long ago. Even if she was just a kid and it's not her fault, obviously, and she's perfect, and knock it off. The key demon, spooky for sure. Like sticking keys in people, gross, spooky stuff for sure. Turning someone's vocal cords off. Hate to see it. Kind of like the hand going through the person's head in Deadpool. Less gross, but like that. Just kind of ugh. This is also one of the most like gaslight movies that has ever been made. Her possessed ghost dad was holding and abducting and killing women, and Elise just assumed they were more ghost girls because, well, why would that not be the case? That makes so much more sense that your dad's being possessed and also kidnapping women. But wow, what a gaslight. The gaslight of epic proportions. We are going to take a small tangent here. Love Elton John music, and I was really happy with how they made that elevated movie version of his life in Rocket Man. They had a really nice scene where he forgives himself with his younger self and older self meeting and having a great line of like, when are you going to hug me? You think it's, about something else and getting love from someone else, but turns out, it's not about getting love from, your dad or those around you, but really, like, he gets to finally accept and love himself. The same thing, I thought, exactly got the same vibe, and that happens here in a spooky movie setting. Those with trauma have to overcome it, and one of the main reasons I got into the genre was seeing all that as my, like, healthy therapy in life, right? You see people go through trauma and they overcome it. If they can do it with some crazy ghost spirits and things, I could probably do it with my everyday life. It's interesting to see this family story have a little more full circle with her estranged nieces also having similar powers. I guess one of the two of them. Things are not as aggressive with her dad, Elise's brother, but the idea of, astral seeing is not super exciting to him because it ruined his upbringing as well. But it's cool to have that family connection of dealing with things and, with her parents and also dealing with things with her brother and his kids. I don't know if this is a strong parent moment that has like the same impact as the first movie, but seeing her dad fight back from the darkness and her mother come back to save Elise and her two nieces, it's nice to kind of see some semblance of that. I would have expected to have more of a reaction to this compared to the first one, where it was, a random family versus Elise, who is obviously one of my favorite characters in any movie, but for some crazy reason it just didn't hit as hard. but also bonding and the family coming together with Elise, her brother, the niece, everything. Just good and nice to see. But it also does not help that the two nieces have like no further place in the plot. Like they don't. You would think, oh, well, maybe they'll end up in like the latest century, but this was the fourth of five, and the fifth one kind of goes straight to the Lambert family and very much becomes a father-dad movie. But it's crazy that they couldn't find a place for these two girls to be in somewhere, because like it feels like there was something there that they were setting up and we just never got around to it. Maybe there's a chance, but it feels like that's going to be a dangling plot that we'll just never get back to. But they just didn't end up in this Red Door movie. So who would have said, right? This movie is just fine. It has moments of a family story. It's definitely a scary bad guy, but obviously they deal with it pretty quick. Like I cared about certain things. But even in a crazy way of having the subject and moments I like be closer to a character who's the best part of the franchise for a family story, somehow that doesn't work intrinsically. It becomes less interesting in a weird way. So this is a movie, Insidious, that really does start off how many in the overall haunting genre world does. A family is in a house, moving in or out, mostly moving into the genre, and things really are just a ball of stress with so many kids around, just running amok all over the place. HGTV never covers all these spooky houses of new homeowners and where do they see them a few months, moved in. They don't do those follow-ups, for shame. I wonder why. The big difference is really having Rose Byrne to co-star with Patrick Wilson here. It's another married couple, but instead of hunting ghosts and demons, the big difference in this franchise is really just, a different couple, right? Rose Byrne co-stars with Patrick Wilson here. Sure, they're a married couple, but unlike, Conjuring, they're not hunting ghosts and demons. They're hunted themselves by one or many and need help. Also, strange, odd part that from Lost Key, Elise sees Dalton, the main kid of the children. It is weird that past Elise sees him from the further fall off the ladder and does nothing. Pretty sure that's how that all worked out. Just an oddity. But she does leave the door open. And like I said, I hate to think it. In the second movie, they're kind of like, oh, Elise did some things, and you're like, oh, that's not great, but I'll apologize for her. But Elise leaving multiple doors open, one in her youth, another here, like that causes more haunts. Not great for her track record. The first two movies have more obvious scares. The footstep muck. I don't know. Things hit harder. And honestly, there is something fun about how this movie, the first of the franchise that set the tone for how these movies should be, it has like subtle scares, right? A face in the window. Who knows what else? But it's just interesting that this movie has such a good, slow, progressive build, which is what you would expect from like the Mike Flanagan things. Not that Mike Flanagan has anything to do with these movies. I just, haunted houses, I don't know, it just sort of, it becomes my staple to think about with Flanagan stuff. One more interesting tease as someone who is not and will never be a Saw person. I still know what the puppet guy on the bike looks like, and his face for sure was teased on a blackboard in one of the school, like, non-horror normal scenes with Patrick Wilson in it. Slick. Also, it's weird to see him in such a different type of role of like this less caring parent instead of the super dad he is in the Conjuring world, not just to like his kids, but especially in Conjuring 2. But he now is just like a dad with a spooky past instead of someone in the industry of fixing things. He is not the Elise in this story. She is. Even though I always think of Elise and her being the badass lady of the story, Barbara Hershey as the mom, Lorraine Lambert, is pretty gosh darn good too for these strong older women that are littered in this series. Not as much as some really good jump scares, but even though the more I watch these, I realize how much of a staple they are. Like I said, I don't know why I keep comparing it to it, but you think of haunted house things, and I think of Hill House, Bly Manor, all that stuff. The Mike Flanagan level kind of is where I hold in high regard. But they also, like here, have kind of that similar nature of the strange, subtle, atmospheric, like jump scares. Having the eventual oldies song theme music change and get louder as Rose Byrne walks past the window, seeing something in the house. Like so many of these just unique things. I know the nun with the picture frame has to be the scariest thing from all the Conjuring movies. And the first Insidious probably has the same thing here. I feel like I saw this every like random image before I even saw the franchise. Seeing the demon with fire face designs just pop up right behind Josh on a bright day. Like that's probably that franchise equivalent, or like I said, the most reported one. At the end of the movie, this movie specifically with the camera, like I would say that should give everything a run for its money more than that thing just existing for a moment. That camera thing, whew, that gets you. Also, how strange is it that 2 movies after these, like first 2 decades for fun to throw a tease, and what we just talked about, to the lipstick fireface demon as the main issue villain here. They didn't need to do that. Just him existing or it existing. It's cool that it exists, but we could just jump into it. We don't need to have this thing teased as this great overarching enemy, because it doesn't even really feel like it's the overarching enemy in its own movie because of what I would say is the main issue characters, spirits in the second movie, which are also in here. But I get it. It adds a little connective tissue to things in movies that don't even pertain to the Lambert family, and it brings it back to them and by proxy through Elise. Specs and Tucker may not always be the highlight of the franchise, but there is something to be said about bringing some semblance of levity and comic humor while still not being too distracting. Like, it's not like some of the Marvel movies have gotten a little too funny for their own good, and definitely some of those later DCEU movies, which is why RIP, it doesn't exist anymore. In the same way that Elise is a highlight of the movie when she's on screen, it's different seeing her here after growing with her for 2 other movies how I watch it. But even still, I feel like she commands as much presence as Donald Pleasance did in the Halloween movies. It's surprising to think how much I care for her in these movies, and that it takes so long for them to introduce her in this entry. Like, halfway or more through, I feel like they introduce her, which is crazy, because to me, she's the main character, especially if you watch it the way I did, which I think is the way you should always watch things, in my mind. It's always like the thought, think about this. Are you going to watch Star Wars now, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and with the other ones thrown in there too? No. You're going to watch them from 1 to 9 with the ones placed in there like where they need to be. Sorry, I got distracted thinking about chronological. You guys know I care about it. It's a staple of me and a staple of this podcast. So, the first of these franchise movies always seems to be the best. And I don't know if that's not saying chronologically. In this case, it's saying release. So I know that flies in the face of what I'm saying, but I think you should still watch them in the order they come out in. But the first always feels like it's the best. And like this, probably they didn't even know this was going to be a franchise. It just sort of became that. But like this movie has, not just subtle jump scares, like all about, but it just has good subtle plot development in like interesting ways to slowly reveal information and not feel like you're just spoon feeding descriptions and deep backstories and history to the audience. It's always interesting, however, that I go so quickly to thinking this dad sucks, to seeing his growth and likability, to feeling like a real present parent. It's weird seeing this style or reaching out that is just so different, with Elise having the gas mask to do them, something that is definitely not a part of these things in the other movies we saw. Just assuming that this stuff is predicated on her being more cautious coming back to this profession that obviously has had some danger and challenges and pitfalls along the way, which obviously it would. It sounds like a crazy profession to be in. But, it chose her in the same way that probably video chose me, right? And maybe not as obvious because I don't have crazy visions of JVC cameras and Sony FX6s and things, but still, I'm always thinking about Avid. That's not me. But even here, like this older version of Elise, and she still seems, honestly, she seems frailer, which is good. I mean, chronologically, she would be. But she's still able to fight off demons and not seemingly being like ordained to do that. She just has the gift and is able to traverse and has the strength to fight. Like, love always seeing her in action. This movie just has fascinating depth of story, with this really being a family story of having Patrick Wilson be haunted by a spirit and have this woman in black constantly being after him. And it's a super interesting way of seeing the spirit get closer in childhood pictures, as different ones taken randomly. It just gets closer and closer and closer. And they're just like, we just aren't about taking photos anymore, Chief. No more photos for you. Your Instagram is going to be so weak. But like, you feel bad for him and also see him like as a better father overall and not so absent. Like, I mean, this is a crazy world, right? He's going into an uncertain fear and who knows what into this world to save his son and potentially open himself up to some super long repressed issues. I don't know if it's more of an atmospheric dread to exist in these movies outside of like maybe us and like the upside down version of their world. But man, do these scenes like always hit hard and strong. They're the wildest ones in these movies. Maybe not the Red Door one, but especially in the first two and this, like these scenes always seem to just hit so hard. And at this point, knowing that it's not a prequel, and I think maybe you wouldn't know that a little bit going into those movies, even if you were a little bit blind to it. Like, at this point, there's no gimme on anything. You don't know who's safe. Maybe you knew that Patrick Wilson was around, but that doesn't mean anything in this franchise. Death is such a fickle, interesting thing where it means so much in either direction, alive or dead. It isn't even just a matter of like which thing is scarier between the bride, women in black, or the fire demon, or just the atmosphere to all the pre-smile souls. But this movie cranks up just how much you want them to make it through and get back to their bodies, like a much scarier Matrix or something akin to that. These movies really do have a way of, of not just making you think things are good, but, they make you think, oh, things are great, and it's all over. And, shoot, everyone makes it out here with, like, less than 10 minutes of the whole movie. Well, as I said, not many deaths happen in this franchise or here, but just as the movie is about to end, we have one. And man, is it a gut punch. It's easily the most, like, creative and best jump scare moment of the whole series. It's not even close. Which makes it all the more better starting things off chronologically, that you're not starting with the best thing going downhill from there. That you're kind of getting this somewhere in the middle. The photo trick of Josh Lambert and his demon chasing him is something that was a very interesting piece of information. And, right, everyone's back, he saved his son, everyone's happy, and there's this little moment that Elise is just like, let me just check something out. And it's this final test of Josh, and she takes the photo, and you think he's just gone mad, right? He chokes out the best part of the franchise. Rip to the goat of the series in this fictional world. But when you finally see how wild it is with the camera proof that he and the demon it's not just behind him anymore. It's not right behind him. They are one and the same. It's a wild and heartbreaking scene. Just think about it, like, man, that's a scary part. I'm kind of in a dimly lit podcast recording studio in my office right now. I'm kind of like, oh, that part was kind of scary. Ugh. But like, it's a wild and heartbreaking scene to end a great chapter of the franchise. Easily the strongest end, and maybe the strongest entry, but like I said, in a crazy way, not the most emotionally resonant, still somehow the third one. And, it's probably a weird thing to bring up on dating apps and bars for a topic, but it's the thing. Or it's my other thing of talking about two powerful vampire content pieces in feminist icon film tackling the patriarchy, The Invitation, and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, the documentary. Sometimes I bring up Daybreakers and the technological advances in a vampire society, but mostly it's the other two. I like 3 movies. What can I say? Has that conversation been helpful? I don't know. But back to the franchise, because we are doing a long episode. We gotta get cooking. We got 2 more movies to talk about still, and this is Chapter 2 of Insidious. So where do we even go for Chapter 2, knowing that the leading lady is dead? I mean, she is the face of the franchise if you watch chronologically. If you don't, you would assume it's Josh Lambert. Well, that is wrong, A. And B, she has way more movies than he, I think. Yes, I'm pretty sure, based on just casual appearances, she is in all 5 movies. He is not. Sorry, sucks to suck. At least this movie starts with a young Elise. But it's cool. She is voiced by the same OG Elise actor, Lin Shaye, even with a casted young actor for the flashback. Super interesting thing to finally see these reference things of Elise and a young Josh, to see why she is a target of this demon, and also gives us more of an idea into the tortured upbringing of Josh. Super weird, he is the hero of this movie, but also a villain of the whole thing. You should get my thoughts on the series that Elise is the hero. I don't care that she accidentally left a red door open in the second movie. We all leave things open but forget things every once in a while. I know this has a little more ramifications, but still, she's the best, and I won't be told otherwise. I love my leading ladies in Scream. Jamie Lee Curtis is elite. Final girls, especially badass ones, are important for the genre. As much as I don't need to rewatch this franchise, Elise is a top tier and hopeful eventual horror genrelist will recognize that as well. As she has got to be. And I don't know what the most reputable one is, but if she's not top tier for a final girl, I think that's insane. And she should be crazy if she wasn't. Probably one of the most unexplainable things in this series will always feel like the wild and out nature of Josh getting away shockingly easy with straight up murdering Elise in his own house with his own hands. Wild how that is kind of forgotten about so easily, especially when things should be obvious. With, once again, there is a photo of the crime, and yeah, okay, it looks like some other thing, but jeezy fuck. I mean, come on. Also, I know I rarely reference him in the first movie that he appears in here. Young kids in horror movies will always almost be the worst. But, let's be real, always they'll be the worst. But Ty Simpkins does a good job with the kid with, a traumatic moment trying to overcome things here as the astral projection son with powers, Dalton Lambert. He did a good job as the kid from Iron Man 3, in a more cute role. But he gets the chance to be probably the more annoying kid in Jurassic World. Better, or a bad or good portrayal. Definitely the annoying kid who always gets into trouble and makes things worse for other people. But to characters I care about a lot in this franchise, they get a build on Tucker and Specs in this way, because we've seen them now for 4 movies. They start as these kind of fun slackers with a ghost show that the Housemans would love, but now they actually assist in solving things, but they still get to keep their fun banter. It's less, you feel like you're clearly missing, there's a hole without Elise as the mother figure in their dynamic. But, it's nice to know that whatever growth those characters had, it's it's from her, so they always feel like her touch is on the story. And like you probably just didn't expect to think long and hard about these characters, especially if you went from the first to the second movie and release date and then went back and saw these two. You really feel like they've matured and grown in a really nice way. And like I said, motherhood will always be a staple of the entire series. From the first one with Quinn and her dead mom, Elise and her mom, and of course how she works with her two assistants. There's a bit of that with Rose Byrne and her kids. Here we see like the opposite of that with the bride in black and, you know, now their mom, like what bad motherhood is. The fatherhood is present a bit, but we always feels more in the next one, I would say. Like motherhood is clearly a staple of 4 of the 5 of these movies, and you know, I always wish Rose Byrne did more and was given more, and you thought this would be the movie she would do it, and it always kind of feels that way, but always feels like it's still missing something. This is, with Elise's character being dead, we get to see Steve Coulter get a little more acting in the series, and it's nice to give him some redemption, you know, from the accusations of being too scared for this line of work. And his dice rolling not only gets, you know, our fun table gaming D&D folks going, but it's just something nice, new, and interesting that leads to some more exciting scare ideas. And it's cool that everyone has their own different little way of doing things in this universe, because once again, they're just making up the rules for whatever they are, and I think that's neat. I think it's a neat thing. But and I mentioned it already with The Shining, but this movie really lets Patrick Wilson fan fiction LARP out his Jack Torrance just being an absolute jerk of a dad, and he does his best Jack Nicholson while trying to keep up an illusion of family man and not just here's Johnny. It is kind of cool to see that balance of seeing like the real Josh try and find his way back from the further and almost doing his own haunt on the family to get his family's attention. Like, it's interesting to see the shoe on the other haunted foot of the normal guy who's not a malevolent spirit haunting the spirit who's with his family. What a interesting change of pace. I don't know which of the original 2 releases of Insidious, like which entry fares better, or even which is scarier. I feel like I like more Elise in the first movie, but the Woman in White and the Bride in Black are really interesting parallels for 2 spooky entities. And honestly, knowing my lack of appreciation for The Nun, the Bride in Black is pretty gosh darn close to spooky entries and characters that are not my fave. The second one probably does more with their cast, has spookier things, but that's what happens when you have a $3.5 million boost to your budget compared to the first movie. Probably one of the most fascinating things is seeing those haunts of Josh from his perspective, seeing things in the past. Like, I think the further gets very confusing, but it's also very interesting. The scenes in general are staples for the series, but this one kind of takes the rules of it further, pun intended, by having real spirit Josh visit things we've seen from the first movie too, not just from earlier in this movie. It's a weird one to wrap your head around, but it takes you along for the ride. And this ride has an amazing part, and it's seeing Elise another time. You knew if I said amazing, it was because of Lynn Shane. She is his shining knight, and it's great to see her once again fight off demons after dying and having the badass balance of kicking ass and sharing her unbridled optimism. And just, gosh, she is the words of affirmation person we all need in our lives, who can just fight any obstacles we have in our lives with the, you know, literal fight, and then with just nice words. Ooh, got a little jump scare from the AC cranking on. Ooh, man. That's what happens when you live in the spooky content world. Back to the movies at hand. Like, Lin Shaye does so much of the hyping up of not just adult Josh, but her colleague Carl, who she finds them both in the spirit world. And look, the further always seems scariest when there's just crowds of these entities or demons. And this is one of those times. This movie does, what is it, The Matrix, or like, swarm mode or horde mode or something like that. But it's never like a walk in the park. It's always so scary to see people being surrounded by these entities and being chased around this endless darkness. One of two is seen, and you are unnerved but can handle it. But like mobs of these things, and that scene of which ghost is a sheet is a scary one. Like hate that. And whoever does the makeup on these demons in the further, so good. Like this is probably, and budget helps, but this is easily the scariest of all that further stuff. And it's such a cool concept that I get the upside down, and I'll have to watch Stranger Things again eventually to kind of remember, but I just don't know if the upside down ever really feels like it has the same oomph as this stuff, just because so much of it is left to your imagination with how dark everything is, and the creatures aren't just these big old monsters. It's like people looking people with smiles, and they're pale, and it freaks me out every time. Very good. And to not make it too much more of how good Elise is, you have to respect that some of her ghost fighting is just beating to death one of the big bads of the franchise while she's already dead herself with like a rocking horse. There's a reason she is the best of the series, and that's so Brat, the mirror of her pop culture. Sheesh. But look, it's nice to see young Dalton be the reason his dad is able to come back from his possession and be able to rejoin the family. And this starts the fatherhood story that, while it feels wholesomely short, like when it's in its best stage, is like it does exist and linger into the last movie. Potentially the final installment with the Lambert family. And have to point out the Tucker and Specs things. Having a guy that big as like the tech guy, he is constantly getting knocked out, and you always like would think he could handle things physically. When things get to scrapping, and it just never happens. He's always the first one to get got somehow. Now, with this movie ending with a mind wipe of avoiding this world, like, it's wild that they do that again. This time Carl does it instead of Elise. But it leads to so many repressed issues. And, like, that would come back to bite. Like, it already did come back to bite while they did it again. Especially with the trauma they experienced. Like, not good. Like, this is kind of a shared thing that, made Josh and Dalton closer. And, like, that just seemed like how they would exist in, the early stages of the first movie. Like, you just think that they would have, now we've both overcome this issue, and like, it'll be tough and we'll have to be aware of this stuff, but like, I don't know. I feel like it brought them together. Now it is kind of cool that even after her death, like the two guys, her little geek squad are still working with Elise, and she's kind of helping them around. I don't know how they that possibly works, but somehow it works, right? They're helping her out, and she's helping them up from beyond the grave. Keeps the business going, though. Keeps the money going. And also, last point, wild to see that the young girl at the end of this movie, the first who Ghost Elise is helping, it's Jenna Ortega, a girl who also can see with the gift, I see dead people, because she sees Elise at the door, but the parents don't. And that was one of her first roles, also being in Iron Man 3 for like a hot moment. How about the fun connection, reunion of two actors in Insidious 2 and Iron Man 3? Who would have thought? What a strange connection. And who knows, maybe as a Scream Queen herself, she'll come back to wherever the next story is for these Insidious movies. But could be a dangling thread, just like Elise's nieces. But, Jen Ortega has clearly carved out some role in the genre. I don't really know about the Wednesday stuff as much. Maybe that's more gothic than horror. But obviously she had a spell in some of the Scream movies, so she's doing okay for herself in this genre. So, on to the most recent entry, maybe a year or two old at best. Insidious, The Red Door. As the one I remember most recently being at least interested in the genre when this happened. I remember the marketing for Red Door, but coming into it the last both chronologically released, this was an interesting one. I didn't really know what to expect. I kind of had a little bit of thought on some things, but where could this movie possibly go with how the last one ended? The release dates had taken viewers away from the Lambert family for 2 movies before coming back to them. And on top of that, I would have been shocked if they had given such a role to Elise this time around, with her death being a bit in the past and the idea of her being wiped away too. Really, of the spooky events that happened are, in theory, not a thing for a fair amount of our characters. Or at least, the Josh and his son, the one who has spooky powers. Outside of some cool early visuals with the cemetery, something I wasn't expecting for the series, thinking, things are not as exciting for this entry early on. Outside of some cool early visuals with the cemetery, something I wasn't always thinking about for the series, things are just not as exciting for this entry early on, especially with the memory wipe. But somehow, once again, off camera, someone dies. In this case, Lorraine Lambert, which, stinks. Heck, her funeral to some degree helps set some things off to bring the scary back to the scary movie entry in the scary movie series. Otherwise, if no scary things happen, what would be the point of this movie existing at all? This movie also puts us in a wild world where, the couple that we expected, they're the family couple, they're, you thought things were okay. And the couple's divorced, the family dynamic seems all off. I'm sure things going all shining on your wife and family is not great. But if everyone makes it out alive and you kind of are like, hey, that clearly wasn't my fault, going back to normal is probably going to be hard overall. Sad to see without the family trauma that things are just not good between any of them. The son with the spooky power too. Dalton is a tortured artist son with teenage angst, and his dad is just a sad man trying to bond with his estranged kids. And without the backstory, that's all it is. At least the idea is no matter what, the Warren family love is always there through going through all the spooky things, but here it's kind of well, it's just not there like it has in The Conjuring. It's crazy how much of a drop off this was off camera, so many years apart from 2 and 3 being released. I don't even know if I can say 3 because 3 is technically 1 chronologically, so this is 5. It doesn't have a number, but of the modern Lambert trilogy, this is 3. We'll say that. Man, it gets confusing. But if the memory wipe did not work, we would not have had another movie. That's how I would explain it. Maybe that the other fire demon would come back still, but I don't know. It's such a strange thing. And okay, right, Lambert, Josh Lambert briefly meets Carl, and that sparks a bit of a memory, and I guess all the art that's happening is just spooky memories. But you're telling me this mom who I don't think her memories were repressed or whatever, she isn't concerned about seeing all the spooky memory art? Maybe angsty teen artists don't show parents to their art, I guess, but still. Maybe angsty teen artists don't show parents their art, but still. With all this art stuff, it's an understandable outlet for this character, this kid, but I guess if one thing is neat, this kid was drawing his own astral projection stuff, pre-memory wipe and post-memory wipe. He's still doing art and stuff. So that's kind of a neat connective thing, at least, to Dalton, right? Also, pour one out for nightlight sleepers. I love to have a string of blue or cool colored lights going on. Not so much for nightlight, but just for nature vibe. I use the Portal app to get some nature sounds. I love a good water. Maybe I'm the worst to have for sleepovers, but pretty much ocean sounds. I do a lot of also the London Night Museum is the big one I use for Portal. Great app, highly recommended. That stuff's non-negotiable for me at this point to sleep. So back to the movie. New character is Dalton's roommate Chris, a woman. Because you gotta, that's a big thing. Oh, they gave me the wrong roommate. Oh, gosh darn. Whatever. The college story just gets so silly sometimes. Chris doesn't really add a lot to the movie. The college story doesn't. It just is blah. Like, I guess the art story of exploring your art is cool. It's like the most stereotypical college thing, I guess. And like, look, art therapy is a thing. And this giving like deeper of a dive into trauma, it's the perfect setup for Dalton to have to face his trauma, once again, repressed just like his father's, and the cycle sadly repeats itself. As a tortured artist creative type, having never taken a drawing class or even being gifted at art outside of video, I guess, I appreciate all of this using expression to discover repressed trauma. Now, I think the class is hilarious where it's so over-the-top drama, like the High School Musical teacher of the crime and punishment, do an entry. This teacher's like, rip up your art. Oh, does that feel cathartic? Now you're a good artist. I don't know. That was wild to me. That was a little much. I do normally like my horror to be a way to explore overcoming trauma, but this franchise takes two men who have to relearn it before they can like go through it weirdly. Like they have to learn what their trauma was, but like I said, it was taken away when it shouldn't have been. That takes us to like the most obvious spooky scene in this movie, with claustrophobia and something running around super close to you and unable to do anything, like in the CT scan machine. Thankfully, all the CT scans I've had done have been less eventful than a demon running around there with me in there. Maybe I do have a little bit of claustrophobia. I was thinking about this, but I'm pretty sure I do. Now, there are times in the first of these movies, one that I liked a lot in Insidious 3, where I tell myself, wow, things are slow moving here before we get to the good stuff with Elise and all the further. Even the first Insidious had that a bit, but this movie, not only are things maybe slow, there's instead just so much of this movie I really, really just could not care less about. Breaking up both father and son discovering and hopefully overcoming trauma with whatever college scenes just do not do anything for me at all. And no matter what, seeing things repeat themselves of trying to block out trauma and repress it, and it obviously goes wrong, either make it work and have a happy end or get stuck with these kind of blah retreads at times. Because this is the fifth one, however you watch these movies, released chronologically, and it feels and shows that it is coming off a bit repetitive. I don't want to come off as irrationally annoyed at this movie. They still have some scares, not as good ones, but also there really is something to be said about watching 4 movies where Elise matters, even if the last one is very late in the game, to get stuck with a less interesting family story with frat party set dressings. It's fun to see brief moments of Specs and Tucker and Elise. Sure, of course it is, always. But does it piss me off as I just yearn for more of what made the franchise good? Of course that happens too. It's the same thing with Halloween 1, 2, 3. When they replace the 4th girl, you're like, well, why'd you do that? Why is our main character not the same main character? Same with Elise and the spectral sighting squad. They did at least bring the Fireface demon back, who seemingly was never truly dealt with in the first movie. They just sort of escaped things, I guess. Not that I needed to see that character back, but fine, whatever. Like, so much of this movie is just dumb, because we know, as an audience, what happened, and the characters spend so much of this movie having to relearn what happened. Also, this movie does the cardinal sin of lore adding many movies later. They all do it when movies become franchises. I can think of the glory of Friday the 13th and Halloween adding crazy deep lore when they sure should not have done that. This movie has Josh's dad, who was an important thing, allegedly, if this movie is anything to go off of. But even retconning something of him being there the whole time would have helped more. This movie is really just a strange post follow-up, and it just makes our characters screwed up for no real reason. If Insidious 2 is gatekeeping 101, if Insidious, the gate one, the keys, the lost keys, 2, if you go chronologically, is gatekeeping 101, really this whole franchise can have that. This whole movie here is like miscommunication 102, if that was a class, which gatekeeping, I could see people wanting to learn that skill, I guess. Gatekeep, girl boss, gaslight. Miscommunication seems like a terrible class to take, but man, did these guys get A's, straight A's in that. Stupid college movie. What a stupid concept. These movies all pretty much pick up in the last 20-30 minutes or so. Some have better build-up than others. And that kind of happens here. But also, this movie has the weakest version of the further, and once again, not even close. It does not have all the atmospheric horror that the rest of the series, even the weaker entries, is known for. It is cool to see the red-faced demon back and actually possessing Dalton this time around. It was always the most visually striking demon here, but we go from dad saving son to son saving dad, back again to dad saving son. Once again, what does that sound like? It's a retread, but none that was needed. Also, random neat visual thing. Art perspective of possessed Dalton pulling a hammer out of a painting. Cool looking thing. Love to see that. Like I said, this movie had a couple interesting visual things, but you need more than that for the rest of the movie. Now, if they want to do something interesting with Josh sacrificing himself for his son, that's neat. He is proving that he's a better father than his, who we once again just met, but we don't do that. Instead, we get some wild stuff of painting the door that is red. Now it's black. Sure. Why not have that be the reason things get closed off forever? Which, once again, they're not really feel like they're dealing with it, but I guess they've dealt with it, whatever. But also, why not, I guess, have his dad show him the way, who we've never met? If it was his mom, I would have honestly cared more, because once again, we've met her for a while and she died, and why can't she be in this place? Like, that feels like such a letdown, especially when this franchise is so based on motherhood. I get it, this episode is based on a father-son thing, but like, you could have had the mother thing there still, because that kind of makes sense, and we just missed out on this great character once again who just died off screen. There was history there built up, and just that pisses me off. Now, closure points notwithstanding, at least the message of the 5 movies later, at least for the family, is shown here, with the son finally realizing that forgiving makes no sense, with the son finally realizing that forgetting makes no sense. You have to remember trauma to get past it. That's good. Now, what is bad is that all these movies' moments could have had some combination in a better way of at least, using Carl, Tucker, Specs. The things at Josh's astral projection house could have easily used all 3 of these established characters. There's some closure of moments with the family here, but that could have been the case with the ending of Insidious 2, maybe. I don't know. Pun intended, they painted themselves into a corner with the end of the second one, and this third one of the Lambert trilogy just feels like it repeats things, gets an end that gets us kind of where we were, but it was a better end when we started. Also, while it was nice to see Elise at the very end as a spirit, it sort of comes out of nowhere. Happy to see her, but they really could have once again hopefully found something more to do if they wanted to actually include her in all this nonsense of a movie. At least at the song at the end of the movie is nice with Patrick Wilson on the track. Like, at the end of the day, with 1 to 2 more of these stories or spin-offs in the series coming out in the next few years, I'll watch them. But man, is this at its current point like a weak end cap to it all. So, time to do some Letterboxd ratings and rankings. In last place, probably not a huge surprise, Insidious the Red Door, 2 stars. just a weak retread of the worst parts of the franchise with very little of the parts that are good. Just a strange movie. Definitely higher, but not much higher. Last Key, once again, one of the two prequel stories for Elise. I kind of like that, obviously, and more her is great, which is why the worst one is one that has the least of her. It's crazy to think that a movie based around her upbringing with her emotional resonance is not higher on my list than the next entry, but Chapter 3 of Insidious has to give me 3 stars. I mean, the fact that I literally had a tearing up emotional catharsis at the end, especially when I didn't give a crap about most non-Elise characters in this movie, that will still blow my mind. But the emotional connection and the motherhood themes that are present throughout 4 of the 5 entries start with this chronologically, and for all else the movie does weird. That part is good, and both Last Key and Chapter 3 have some good further scenes and some good Elise scenes, but clearly there's a drop-off. So here comes the tough part. I have 2 movies left that I feel pretty good about. Insidious and Insidious Chapter 2. And this will make it even harder. I'm going to give them both a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Pretty good. 7 out of 10 is not a bad place to be. Now, I got to put one of them higher for my list, and I think that's important. But they're both great. I think I really like the slow build of Insidious. I like Elise in this story, obviously. But I think there's a little bit more for Patrick Wilson to do in the second one. And the big bad is a little scarier. Insidious itself has an amazing, scary, sad end. But it's almost built up better by 2 with the good resurging comeback of Elise fighting from beyond the grave. And I think the Lambert family has more to do. And you can tell the budget helps, but they're both really good. I think it's one of the few worlds, I think it's one of the few franchises where the direct sequel, passes the original. And this is Release, and it is the next one to follow that chronologically. But both very good. Long one, so I appreciate y'all sticking with me. It's a bit of a doozy. That only the first and last of these movies chronologically were available to stream, or at least the main Conjuring entries were available on Netflix. Once again, who knows if this is still the case, but this is what last time I checked, which has been a while. But, I think the first of these is on Max, and the last is on Netflix for Insidious. And so you have to do a little bit of pay renting on Amazon, which, if I'm really dying to see something, I'll give them like $2 to $3 here and there. So, as it is hard to not compare the 2 Wilson franchises, here we go. So yeah, if you look at my Letterboxd rating on average, these are probably better. There are some stinkers in Conjuring, like La Llorona and the Nunning movies. I think I like the dynamic better of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I rarely care for the families being haunted. I care more for the spirit demon hunters. And while Conjuring probably has the edge to most people, it's real hard for me to look past how much the character of Elise matters to me in these. And I blew my mind that happened. The Nun might be the scariest thing out there outside of Smile and the grossness of Saw. I don't know if those are even scary. They're just gross. Don't need those in my life. But I feel like I get more scared. Take away the Nun character. Not even what the Nun does. Just the concept of the Nun. The look of the Nun. The Insidious movies are probably have a little more scares. I don't need to rewatch any of these in general. Not as much as, the slashers of old. I say old in quotes. Your Halloweens and Friday the 13th. Love Scream. Like I said, saw a couple of those on my flight to and from Brazil. Just for fun. Just because I love them so much. Gotta find a way to watch the Three's TV show seasons. So there's gotta be a way to buy those somewhere. not on like an Apple or Amazon, but like own them in a way where I own the files. I'm very big on media retention like that. But to this franchise's credit, horror movies, not often do they make me cry. So hats off to you, Insidious 3. But which franchise do you prefer? Let me know on social at either KnickKnackIC or KnickKnack Movies on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Pinterest, so many more. That might be all of them. I think I got them all. But hey, that's all for me for this one. So hoping to be with you much sooner than last time, permeating your eardrums with my smooth, velvety voice, talking about movies and spooky movies now that we're in the season. But until then, cheers. And as always, see you next time, Cinephiles.
Are you not entertained?
I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, alligator.